wife and I separated, and I'm now with Linda Kozlowski, and that's the sort of full story. How, when, where, why, and all these sort of intimate details. No one needs to know any of that.
Paul Hogan, the iconic star of Crocodile Dundee, has at last come clean on the most potent truth of his life, a revelation regarding the woman who owned his heart. Aside from the stardom, the blockbuster hit, and the headlines that trailed him for decades, Hogan's best tale was never about Hollywood, it was about romance. A romance that took the world's imagination, ended in tragedy, but never really went away. Years of silence have passed, and Hogan is now ready to tell us who she was and why he still keeps this love inside his heart today. The charm of Crocodile Dundee didn't end with its fish-out-of-water setup or its action comedy hijinks. At its emotional heart was the romance between Mick Dundee and Sue Charlton, the American reporter who trailed him into the outback and subsequently into New York. That romance, at the heart of the appeal of the movie, shortly after replicated reality for its leads, Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski. Linda was a fresh young actress from Connecticut with Broadway credentials but minimal film recognition. Getting the part of Sue was intended to be her career-defining moment, not a life-changing personal experience. When she encountered Hogan on the set, she didn't see him as the soon-to-be international superstar but rather as a no-nonsense man with a quick sense of humor and an ability to put people at ease. Linda was rejuvenating to Hogan in a manner that he had not anticipated. She wasn't starstruck by his growing celebrity. Instead, she bonded with the man behind the brash exterior, a guy who still considered himself a fortunate Aussie who used to paint bridges. From the initial days of shooting, their rapport was evident. Cast and crew recalled how effortless their repartee appeared, as if they were falling into characters that they already knew from memory. Linda would go on to confess that chemistry between her and Hogan was unspoken and palpable, something she had never felt before. That realness translated to the screen, with their on-camera affair seeming irresistibly true to viewers all over the world. Next was one complication that could not be helped: Hogan was far from a free agent. He remained married to his first wife, Nolene Edwards, mother of his 5 children. They had survived rough patches before, a divorce in 1981 and reconciliation, remarriage, but by the time Crocodile Dundee came into production, they were far from happy with each other. With Linda, those cracks became gaping questions without answers for Hogan. Right away arrived the media frenzy, on a persistent quest. Tabloid speculation into Hogan's life reached new heights as his career took off and his second marriage to Nolene fell apart during filming. To the general public, this was part gossip and part fairy tale, a national hero breaking the ties of a decades-long marriage for the glamorous co-star whose love story with him had set the big screen ablaze. Those things were, for Hogan and Kozlowski, a very real thing. They were no longer in possession of keys to the well-being of the media world but instead resigned themselves to what was the love affair they both just knew existed. Hogan himself once quoted, "You don't get to choose these things," which was an indication that he did not arrange whatever he ended up with Linda. Instead, this encounter was meant to happen outside of their own doing. To the fans, it was life imitating art. The romance between Mick and Sue lived on past the screen. To Hogan, it was more than that, it was a watershed moment in his life that would set him on a different track at the height of his career. But love that starts under the intense glare of the spotlight seldom is without repercussions, and soon their romance would ignite one of the most acrimonious divorces in Australian history. Before being a Hollywood star, Paul Hogan was merely an average bloke with a special twinkle. Sydney-born, Hogan was raised in a humble, working-class family. His early days were not spent on red carpets and script pages. Rather, he acquired the lessons of hard work, painting the Sydney Harbour Bridge, climbing dizzy heights with nothing but a brush and determination. To everyone around him, Hogan was just a handyman. But under the surface, he had a quick wit and a talent for telling jokes, skills which one day would rewrite his life. The break came almost by chance. In early 1970s, Australia had a talent program called New Faces. It was raw and unpredictable compared to today's slick reality shows. Hogan was not trained as a comedian. He did not arrive with scripted routines or honed stand-up. Rather, he appeared in his own skin, a cheeky Aussie who mocked the judges, the format, and even the concept of talent competitions. His brazenness was unseemly, but effective. The audience was in stitches, and Hogan became a bridge painter turned national celebrity overnight. Producers were in attendance. Before long, Hogan was fronting his own program, The Paul Hogan Show. Week after week, he delivered sketches that blended Aussie humor with a universal appeal. He wasn't trying to be glamorous, he was relatable, the kind of bloke you'd meet at a pub. And that's exactly why people adored him. In a world where comedy often felt distant and polished, Hogan was real. He drifted into satire, mocked authority, and made mundane Aussie life fodder. It was now the mid-1970s, and Hogan was no longer just a TV star, he was a national icon. The fame extended beyond the realm of comedy, he was approached to sell Australia to the wider world. Hogan was subsequently featured in a now iconic Australian tourism campaign with slogans, "Come and say day," and the now famous line, "Put another shrimp on the Barbie," during the 1980s. It was cheeky, it was basic, and it functioned. The ad turned Hogan into an international celebrity and tinted Hong Kong's image in the minds of millions of visitors. Nevertheless, Hogan remained incredibly down-to-earth. His mates and co-workers would comment that stardom did not make him greatly different. He remained the rough-around-the-edges Sydney bloke who could spin a joke on demand, much happier in a familiar pair of ripped jeans than a tuxedo. Nevertheless, Hogan's ambition was growing in the background. He craved something greater than TV sketches or advertising spots. He desired a film that would truly reflect the authentic Australian spirit and entertain audiences all over the globe. And that vision became Crocodile Dundee. Written by Hogan himself, the film was largely based on outback myths and, naturally, Hogan's sense of humor. It was more than just a movie, however, but a risk. Hollywood was not eager for a picture of a bushman from the Northern Territory. But he did believe it, and it burst when it eventually opened in 1986. The world was captivated by Mick, Crocodile, Dundee, the rough but gentle bushman who could deal with crocodiles as effortlessly as city residents. Paul Hogan had become a national comedian to international superstar. Awards, interviews, and red carpets ensued, but essentially, it was all much the same as it had ever been, grabbing the public's attention with authenticity, humor, and a bit of cheek. And as the film thrust him into international fame, it didn't simply redefine his career, it started to reshape his life beyond that. When Crocodile Dundee opened in 1986, it was a mere comedy adventure, but it became something much bigger than that, an international phenomenon. The idea was simple on paper, a bushman from the Australian outback transplanted into the urban jungle of New York City. But in the hands of Paul Hogan, Mick Dundee became more than that. He wasn't only a character, he was a symbol of Australian toughness, humor, and charm. He could wrestle a crocodile in one scene and disarm strangers with a smile in the next, performing a kind of masculinity that was at once fearless and accessible. The response from audiences was phenomenal. The movie took in over $300 million at the worldwide box office, setting records and ensuring it would be the biggest grossing Australian film in history. In the United States, it was second only to Top Gun at the box office that year, a feat that no one expected. Almost overnight, Paul Hogan went from being Australia's wisecracking TV comedian to an international household name. He received the Golden Globe for Best Actor and also received an Academy Award nomination for co-writing the script, both of which further underscored how earth-shattering the film's impact was. Hollywood was convinced that Hogan was its next big commodity out of it. Studio bosses wanted to capture the lightning in a bottle of Crocodile Dundee and make him a star for the long haul. They were fast amassing a list of sequels and new films. Some were box office hits, others tanked, but however divergent the results, Hogan's persona merged with Mick Dundee's. He no longer was Paul Hogan. To millions of global viewers, he was Crocodile Dundee, a colossally iconized character whose cultural reach went far beyond the cinema. But fame brought added complexity. As the world welcomed him as its new rough hero, his personal life also changed in completely other ways. Success of this film had reshaped Australian images in the world. Global views of Australia beforehand had been largely shaped by cliché images of kangaroos, deserts, and some kind of remoteness. Crocodile Dundee offered an alternative picture of a nation that is adventurous, funny, and irresistibly charming. What Hogan did not realize at the time was that this movie would not only transform his career. On the same set, he would encounter a woman whose influence on his life would prove to be even larger than fame. When Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski eventually publicly confirmed they were a couple, it was not only a romance, it was a scandal. For millions of Australians, Hogan was not only an actor, but a national treasure. He rose from obscurity and working-class roots to the nation's favorite export, and his wholesome, cheeky charm seemed inviolable. That aura shattered when news emerged of him leaving Nolene Edwards, his high school sweetheart, his wife of over 2 decades, and the mother of his 5 children, for a far younger American actress. The press went into orbit. Tabloids throughout Australia and the US splashed across their pages stories of betrayal, broken promise, and Hollywood enticement. Nolene herself was turned into a symbol of sympathy, being called Australia's most wronged woman. The divorce in 1986 of the couple was contentious, protracted, and public. The press styled it as Australia's ugliest divorce, with lawyers fighting over property and custody and reporters chronicling every step along the way. The popular reaction was outraged. How could Hogan, the quintessential Aussie everyman, abandon his family for another? But beneath the banner headlines, Hogan and Kozlowski were stealthily creating something genuine. They didn't parade their affair in the first instance, instead pulling away from the media show and concentrating on one another. To Hogan, Linda was not a glamorous Hollywood flight, she was a colleague who could comprehend the surreal life he found himself in overnight. Overnight fame with Crocodile Dundee had propelled him into international fame, and Linda was by his side, living it all first time, too. Together, they explored the tornado and deepened their connection. Hogan was frequently berated for leaving behind his average, Aussie heritage, but Linda provided balance in ways the public could not perceive. She loved his penchant for privacy, his sarcasm, and his simple tastes out of the spotlight. While the world picked apart their every action, the two supported each other, forging a connection that would last decades.